I have a show every day on the Sputnik network with Brian Becker. It's called Loud and Clear. And to tell you the truth, I'm very proud of it. I want to preface this by saying that when I was first interviewed for this job, Sputnik approached me. They offered it to me. And I said, well, I don't know. It's owned by the Russian government. I said, if I took this job, I would want complete freedom to talk about any issue I wanted and to be able to criticize anybody I wanted, including Vladimir Putin. And they said, done. And I said, really? Are you willing to put it in writing? They said, yes, done. And they did. I've been there for almost a year and a half now. No one has ever asked me to say something or to not say something. No one has ever asked me to take a certain position. I have utter and complete freedom to say anything that I want. So with that in mind, Brian and I decided to do a weekly segment for 30 minutes every Thursday. It runs from 4:30 to 5 o'clock Eastern time every day, called Criminal Injustice, in which we look at the criminal justice system across the country. We look at things like sentencing reform, criminal justice reform, and frankly, we look a lot at crooked cops and crooked prosecutors and crooked judges, and these things are just a part of everyday life. These are a fact of the American justice system. Well, wouldn't you know, last week, the Washington Post publishes an article, quite a long article, in which it quotes a new study written by two eggheads from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. One of these people is a former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security in the Obama administration. And they point out our show in particular by name. They mention the segment Criminal Injustice by name. And their conclusion is that because we are on a Russian station and we are criticizing the American judicial system, that we are weakening democracy itself. We're damaging the American democratic system. My initial reaction was to laugh. I mean, it's laughable. It's ridiculous. But, you can't laugh because people are serious about this kind of thing. This is how upside down we've become in Washington. It's another Red Scare all over again. And I have friends who consider themselves to be lifelong progressives who will look at you straight in the eye and say that Russia is the greatest threat to the United States and to the American way of life today. And I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, because if they had any idea that they were being propagandized, they would be disgusted with themselves. But this is what we're up against, Joe. You live it every day, just like I do. Ray McGovern lives it every day. I see Ray's joined us as well. And so, I wish that we could get the word out to everybody. I wish that we could explain to people and educate people as to how preposterous this is and how damaging it is to our way of life. If anything is a threat to our democracy, it's this neo-fascism that we're getting from what is ostensibly the left. And it's extraordinarily disappointing to me. I also want to echo something that you said, Joe. This Vault 7 situation is bad. And it's bad because Joshua Schulte, the CIA officer who's been arrested. Now, remember that for a whistleblower to be a whistleblower, the criteria are very clear. You have to have brought to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. Motivation is irrelevant. We don't know what his motivation was. I don't care what his motivation was. If he brought to light evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality, the guy's a whistleblower. So what was he arrested for? He was arrested for possession of child pornography. Not on espionage charges, not in the beginning. Possession of child pornography. Now, did he have child pornography? I have no idea. The feds said that Matt DeHart had child pornography on his computer when he was arrested after blowing the whistle in the military. And in fact, there was no such thing on his computer. The judge asked to see the evidence of child porn. There was literally zero evidence of child porn. The judge threw that count out and told the government not to ever do something like that again. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is a pattern. What drives the government crazy in whistleblowing cases, Joe, is when the public pays attention and support for the whistleblower begins to grow. And so how do you separate the whistleblower from his natural constituency, from those who would automatically support him? You charge him with a child sex crime. What could possibly be worse than a child sex crime? But we know now that they make it up. So they charged Josh Schulte with a sex crime. Now they've added multiple counts of espionage. You're right that the new rules, and we know this because he wrote a letter to his judge, the new rules dictate that he be taken manacled, shackled, leg chains, a chain around the midsection, handcuffs, and then the handcuffs are chained to the chains. All right, this is how they do it. He's taken in chains, in manacles, to the SCIF. Now, the SCIF is in the Justice Department's building in New York. He's only allowed to go there from 9 to 5. Now, the Justice Department prosecutors can work 24 hours a day, and believe me, they do. He can only be there with his lawyer from 9 to 5. Not only is he strip searched on the way in and on the way out, but he has to be chained to an eye bolt in the floor so he can't move. His lawyer has to be searched going in and going out. That's unprecedented. And then on top of that, they have CCTV cameras inside the vault to watch him at all times. Now, purportedly there is no listening device, but we don't know. There's also an FBI agent that has to be in the vault with him at all times, but the FBI agent is on his honor not to report back to the prosecutors what he and his attorney are talking about. You know, this isn't justice. I'm going to tell you something that my attorney told me. I had Judge Leonie Brinkema in my case. Judge Brinkema is the same judge that Julian would have if he were to be returned to the United States, and I pray to God he's not. But with Judge Brinkema, the fix is in. She was a longtime federal prosecutor before coming to the bench. She was a Reagan appointee, and then she was elevated in the Clinton administration, but only at the request of John Warner, who was a Republican, conservative Republican senator. So she has prosecution in her soul. There's nothing friendly about her, especially in a national security case. Well, Judge Brinkema, in my case, scheduled a hearing for us. We made 70 separate motions at one point to declassify 70 documents that were necessary for my defense. And we blocked off 3 days in order to argue these 70 motions. We walked into the courtroom and she said, I'm going to make everybody's job very easy. I'm going to deny all 70 of these motions. She said to me, I don't think you need a single one of these documents to defend yourself. Well, these documents were the only defense that I had. So instead of 3 days, we were out of court in 5 minutes. And as we were leaving the courtroom, I said to my lawyer, my lead attorney, what just happened in there? And he turned to me and he said, we just lost the case. That's what happened. And I said, so what do we do now? And he said, now we negotiate a plea. I said, I'm not negotiating a plea because I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to go to trial. And he stopped me and he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is that you think this is about justice. This isn't about justice. This is about mitigating damage. And he was exactly right. And that wasn't true just of me. That's true of all of us. Whether it's Ray McGovern getting arrested for exercising his constitutional right to freedom of speech, or Julian Assange blowing the whistle on war crimes and crimes against humanity, or Josh Schulte posting purportedly classified documents in the public interest. It's not about justice. There is no justice, not in this system. It's about mitigating damage. And in a system like that, we can't win.
Were you ever shackled in that way? You described it as if you had been.
Oh, yes, I was, multiple times. I broke my finger in prison at one point. And and they wouldn't treat it. And so my arm was swollen all the way up to my elbow, swollen like I couldn't bend my fingers, I couldn't move my hand. And then finally, after 16 days, they decided to take me out for an X-ray. And so they shackled me like that. And worse than that, it's not just the shackling. They strip you naked, they do a body cavity search, and then they put you in a uniform made out of paper. And so it's barely on you, right? And then over the paper uniform, that's when they put all the chains and the shackles and the manacles around your ankles. And they take you out like that. It was the dead of winter, right? This was the first week of February that they took me out like this. It's snow and ice everywhere. I don't have a coat because I'm not allowed to have a coat because I could, I guess, hide something in the coat, I suppose. So I'm in this paper uniform, naked underneath, shackled. They take me to the doctor. The doctor does an X-ray, and he said, you know, your finger's broken, your hand is broken. Normally I would set it, but you broke it so long ago, it's already begun to heal itself. So he said, sorry, buddy. And I still can't bend my finger. It won't bend. But I mean, that was minor compared to what some of these other guys are going through. But this is what Josh Schulte has to go through every time he wants to see his attorneys. Every single time.
And he's not been convicted of anything yet.
No, he's not been convicted of anything.
Yeah, and that's how they're treating him. Mm-hmm. What could Julian Assange look forward to if he should ever get into the hands of these people? Oh,
literally nothing good. I can tell you what my first day was like. I turned myself into the FBI on a Monday morning. The FBI actually tried to arrest me on a Thursday. And they do that on purpose. They try to make their arrests on Thursdays because federal courts don't arraign anybody on Fridays. And so if you're arrested on Thursday, you have to spend Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night in the DC jail, where you're going to get softened up a little bit by a couple of the guys in there. Because you're wearing a suit, you're a white middle-class guy, middle-aged guy. And so you're going to have a tough 4 days. That's exactly what they want. They want you to be beaten. They want you to be humiliated so that you're more likely to take a quick plea deal just to get out of that situation. So the only thing that saved me is on that Thursday afternoon, I said, I want to see my attorneys and I want to see them right now. That was the only thing that saved me because they had to let me see my attorneys. So I turned myself in on Monday. They handcuffed me in the lobby of the FBI Washington field office. They walked me 30 feet and then uncuffed me. I took mug shots and fingerprints, and then they chained me to a bench, to a metal bench. I sat there for 3 hours, and I was chained just with cuffs. So I had to sit like this, cuffed to the foot of the bench. I couldn't sit up straight for 3 hours like this. Then they put me in an SUV, cuffed behind my back so that I couldn't sit back. I had to sit leaning forward while they're peeling through the streets of Washington, and I'm being tossed all over the back of the SUV, which I learned later they also do on purpose. And then they took me into the basement of the federal building in Alexandria, Virginia. This is where Julian would be charged. And then they turn you over to the marshals. So I had never worked with the marshals before. I don't know any marshals. I had never had any professional interaction with the marshals. So I walked in and I'm in a suit, tie, everything, cuffed behind my back. And this marshal, who could not possibly have been more than 20 years old, shouts, "Up against the wall, motherfucker." And he pushes me, throws me up against the wall. So I slammed into the wall. And I said, "Oh, so this is how it's going to be, huh, tough guy?" And that just made him angrier, or faux angrier, whatever it was. And I decided, if he's going to be a dick to me, I'm going to be a dick to him. So I kept calling him kid, which just enraged him. And then my punishment was they chained me to the bench again in the holding cell. There were 4 of us in this holding cell. I was the only one who was chained. And of the other 3 guys, 2 were child molesters who had been caught at the Iwo Jima, laying in the bushes for children. and one was a Chinese drug smuggler. So I was the only one chained. At one point, I said, listen, I'm diabetic. I've been in here for like 6 hours. I'm starting to get the shakes. I got to have carbs. I have to have something to get my blood sugar up. And they threw a bologna sandwich at me, which, came apart in the air and was on the floor. And one of the child molesters picked it up and gave it to me. And then finally they put me in a single cell, again, still cuffed. I was able to talk to one of my attorneys through like a little confessional window, but with little tiny bars in it. And then they took my tie and my shoestrings after the fact, after all this was over. So I went into court with no tie and no shoestrings. And then the last thing, and let this be a lesson to Julian too, because these guys, they think they're so smart and they're not. I was arraigned. I pled not guilty. And then they said, you need to go to the marshal's office. They need for you to sign some papers before you leave. Well, yeah, what's it take? 5 seconds, 10 seconds maybe to sign some papers? But what they do is they make you sit there for hours so that the media that's waiting for you outside, after they interview the prosecutors who walk out of the courtroom, they get tired of waiting for you and they pack up and they go home. So when you finally leave 3 hours later, there's nobody out there to get your side of the story. Well, my lawyers were smart enough to know this. So they said to me, look, they're going to make you sit here for the rest of the afternoon. Let's go outside now. There's nothing to keep you in here. We'll go outside now. We're going to tell every reporter in Washington what our side of the story is, and then we'll come back and sign the papers. Well, the marshals saw us leaving. We'd only been in that office for 5 minutes. The marshals saw us leaving and said, hey, you can't leave. And one of my attorneys turned around and said, you show me the statute that says we can't leave. Go ahead and look it up because we're going to be back in a half an hour. So we left. I gave an interview to, everybody in Washington was out there waiting. And then I went back in. They made me sit for another hour. And then I signed my documents and left. I fear that Julian will not have the luxury of leaving. They'll probably lock him up and keep him locked up. And, I hope Julian is watching this, or I guess he can't because he doesn't have internet access, but I hope he hears about it because I'm going to repeat.
31 hours.
I'm going to repeat advice that I've tried to convey to him in other venues. If there's anything that you can do to stay out of the Eastern District of Virginia, do it. Because you will not get a fair trial here. The deck is stacked. I was so panicked about being wronged in the Eastern District that I hired a jury consultant. And this jury consultant happened to be the uncle of my best friend's wife. And so his $10,000 a day fee, he cut it to zero. He did it out of the goodness of his heart. This guy was O.J. Simpson's jury consultant. He was William Kennedy Smith's jury consultant. He was George Zimmerman's jury consultant. So this is the real deal. So he came up to Washington. He lives in Dallas. And we got him a security clearance so he could read the background of my case. And then we all got together. Now, I was not allowed to see my attorneys anywhere except in the Justice Department's classified conference room. This is what Josh Schulte is going through, and this is how it's going to be for Julian as well. You cannot speak to your attorneys in their office because the government's going to argue that everything that you have to say is classified, and so you have to talk to them in the Justice Department's conference room, which of course is bugged. Of course they have access to the computer that you're working on. Of course they know what your strategy is. So you can't win in that respect. So anyway, the Eastern District of Virginia, I forget what I was saying, Joe. I keep going off on these tangents and now I forget.
That's fine.
No, tell me what was my point.
Well, you were saying that you would hope that Julian Assange does everything he can to stay out of that.
Yeah. So, the jury consultant. So he comes up and he reviews the case. We have 15,000 pages of classified documents. And finally he says to me, listen, if we were in any other district in America, we'd win this thing. He said, you haven't done anything wrong. You haven't broken the law. But the Eastern District of Virginia, they don't call it the Espionage Court for nothing. No national security defendant has ever won a case, ever, in the Eastern District of Virginia. I said, so what are you telling me to do? He said, I'm telling you to take the deal. And so I had to take the deal. Now, the only reason that I was as lucky as I was is because my lawyers were geniuses. The Washington Post called my attorneys legal titans. They said that they were the best white-collar criminal defense attorneys in Washington. That says a lot. And so they negotiated something for me called an 11C1C plea. This is another thing that I want to convey to Julian. An 11C1C plea is an agreement between the prosecution and the defense that's written in stone. It cannot be changed. It can be rejected, but it cannot be changed. And so rather than face 45 years, or realistically, as my attorney said, 18 years, my attorneys negotiated 2.5 years, of which I would do 23 months. That was an 11C1C, and it went to the judge as a take it or leave it proposition. So when she received it, she read it right there up at the bench, and she looked at me, she told me to stand, and she said, I have been a judge since 1986. This is the first 11C1C plea I have ever had. She said, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. And if it were up to me, I would give you the maximum. And I thought to myself, well, it actually is up to you. Because if you weren't all talk, you could reject it and I could go to trial. And I could talk about the hideous shit that I saw at the CIA in the 15 years that I was there, the last 7 being in counterterrorism operations, and you can imagine how filthy those are. So I just stood there and I thought to myself, so if you don't like it, then reject it. And she says, but my hands are tied and I'm forced to accept it. And she accepted it. So instead of the government asking for 45 years and me doing 18 years and probably dying in prison, I ended up getting 2.5. I did 23 months and I came home. If Julian has any opportunity whatsoever to negotiate an 11C1C plea, he's got to do it. It'll be the only thing that saves him.
You don't think that's realistic that he'll be able to do that, do you?
Well, you know, I think it is realistic because I think there's one thing that Julian has on his side that the government can't do a doggone thing about, and that's the notion of jury nullification. You know, there are enough right-thinking people out there, especially in a well-educated, well-informed area like the Washington area, where there are going to be people called for jury selection who are going to say, this is nonsense. This guy did a public service. This guy exposed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Just because the government doesn't like him doesn't mean he belongs in prison. So I think the government ought to be worried about prospective jurors thinking, wait a minute, this Assange guy is a hero. He's not a criminal. And no matter what the government has to say, we're not going to vote to convict. I think that's a real possibility.
If they say that during jury selection, they won't get selected. They better keep
selected
themselves to the trial.
That's right. They would have
jury nullification is, of course, when the government can prove that the suspect broke the law, but the jury decides the law is unjust. Correct. It's the closest we have to a public defense, public interest defense that doesn't exist in the U.S. but does in the UK, where you could say, yes, he leaked the classified information, and that's technically against the law, but it was in the public interest. Can't mount that defense in the U.S., but that's the only thing we might be able to rely on is jury nullification. I just wanted to say, John, when you were talking about how you were treated that day, the irony of it to these guys treating you like that, it didn't dawn on them that you were there because you had exposed torture. And that's how they were treating you. So it's really extraordinary.
And at one point, I was sitting in this chair before they put me in the cage. I was sitting in this chair, and one of the marshals said, how do you spell your last name? And just instinctively, I stood up to answer him. And he shouts at me, motherfucker, if you stand up one more time, I'm going to break your legs. And I said, my God, man, does this make you feel manly talking to people? Like, what's the matter with you? And so I sat back down. It's like, okay, so this is how it's going to be.